Hello, doctors. I'm Dr. Chris Rapoff of QME Continuing Education, and welcome to this week's presentation. Today, we're going to discuss a condition that has become an epidemic in the United States, and that's the subject of obesity, but specifically how it affects the workers and how it affects the workers' compensation system in the state of California. In the report that we're going to discuss, Obesity is a Medical Disease, Potential Implications for Workers' Compensation, was created by Bob Young and Alex Swedlow and published by the California Workers' Compensation Institute in August 2013. It examines the impact of the American Medical Association's reclassification of obesity as a disease on the workers' compensation system. Now, this is a 14-page report with extensive data presented in a very readable format. I do suggest that everyone take the time to read this, as the information is both informative and somewhat shocking. But today I'll provide you with the summary of its findings, so let's get started. First are the following sources that I referenced when producing this presentation. Feel free to copy and paste these links into your browser if you'd like to learn more about the problem with obesity and its effects specifically on the workers' compensation system in the state of California. Before we get started, I thought I would provide you with some statistics that are pretty startling. But first, I wanted to mention that this analysis used data from 1.2 million claims from accident years 2005 to 2010. And the findings showed that the claims with obesity as a comorbidity had significantly higher rates of lost time from work, permanent disability, and attorney involvement. Now, here's the kicker. The average benefit payments on an indemnity claim with obesity was about $116,437, or 81%, actually 81.4% more than those without. And these claims also average nearly 35 weeks of lost time, which is 80% more than the average of 19 weeks for non-obesity claims. So I think you can see where this study is going. I'm sure you're all aware of what the body mass index represents, but we'll just review it a bit. The BMI categorizes individuals as underweight, normal weight, overweight, or obese. And obese is a BMI or body mass index of above 30. And that is linked to health risks like heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension. Now, the CDC considers a person with a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9 to be in the normal range, while a person with a BMI below 18.5 is considered underweight, and someone with a BMI of 25 to 29.9 is classified as overweight. Individuals with a BMI above 30 fall into the obese category. Now, in addition to anyone with a BMI of 40 or above is deemed extremely obese. Now, using these criteria, as an example, a 6-foot man would be considered underweight at 135 pounds, overweight at 184 pounds, obese at 221 pounds, and extremely obese at 295 pounds. Now, the CDC did label obesity as an epidemic, with more than 1/3 of American adults classified as obese as of 2009 and 2010, according to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Now, that was then, and you can imagine, I'm sure things have not improved much since. Now, a little closer to home, let's discuss some California-specific data within the workers' compensation system. Now, the issue of obesity is really not new, but until now, obesity was almost exclusively treated as a comorbidity. And a comorbidity is a condition that occurs at the same time, but usually independent of a work-related compensable injury or illness. Now, self-reported data indicated that nearly 1 in 4 adult Californians were obese, We said the national average was 1 in 3. So with the rate more than doubling since 1990, as I said, this report is 2009. Now, this suggests that the Californians are similarly affected, maybe not as much, by the obesity epidemic. They found that the number of claims in which obesity was flagged as a comorbidity is relatively small, and the data shows that 83% of these claims have involved lost time, and 68% are associated with a permanent disability, with back sprains and strains and upper and lower extremity sprains comprising 1/3 of the cases. Probably not surprising. With increased weight, you're going to have increased load on the lower back and the lower extremities. You may be asking yourself, so what if the AMA determines that obesity is a medical disease? Well, their reclassification of this as a disease, they're hoping, will influence various sectors, including employment law, insurance, and medical reimbursement. There is a concern that obesity might become a primary workers' compensation diagnosis instead of a comorbidity, particularly in the sedentary jobs, which would lead to potential litigation over causation. And you can imagine the arguments there. However, the AMA delegates, they voted to declare obesity as a disease. And this followed the endorsement of a reference committee chaired by the occupational medical specialist, Dr. Douglas Martin. And he had debated the issue and determined that inasmuch as redefining obesity as a disease may help patients get useful treatment, the potential benefits outweigh the potential harm from increased stigmatization of obesity. This reference committee also concluded that the ramifications of obesity warrant a paradigm shift in the way the medical community tackles this complicated issue. So it's no surprise that people are being alarmed at these numbers that have been presented in this report. I don't want to get too much into the weeds with regard to the statistics. However, the next several slides will give you some information that was basically the findings and the details of this actual study. Now, first of all, in claims characteristics, only 0.5% of claims had an obesity comorbidity, but 83.2 of those were indemnity claims, which was triple the rate for non-obesity claims. So there was payout for it and loss. Permanent disability was also noted in 67.6 of the obesity claims as compared to 14.8 of the non-obesity claims. That's staggering. Also, with diagnostic categories, the claims with obesity were concentrated in a few categories, like medical back problems, 24%, no surprise, degenerative joint disorders of 10.8%, sprain of the shoulder, arm, knee, or lower leg at 8%, and spine disorders at 6.7%, ruptured tendons, tendonitis, myositis, and bursitis at 5.7%. Now, we as QMEs see these cases all the time, and we are required to examine these applicants for these injuries, and you can see just how drastic these numbers are presenting with the obesity issue. What role does attorney involvement play in these obesity claims? Actually, attorney involvement was pretty high in obesity claims at 68.4%, compared to non-obesity claims at 15.4%. Now, some of the reasons for those attorney involvements suggest that these cases are usually more complex, remain open longer potentially, and may involve disputes over causation, apportionment, treatment, extent of injury, and return to work. The presence of comorbidities with obesity versus without. Well, they found that obesity claims at higher rates of additional comorbidities, such as metabolic disease, 15.1 versus 0.9 with non-obese, circulatory, 29.2% versus only 1.7%, mental health, 25.6% versus just a mere 3%, Inflammatory conditions, look at this one, 70%, it's actually 70.4% of obese versus 14% of non-obese. And finally, substance abuse was involved in 8.9% of those that are obese versus 0.9% that were not. So there are drastic differences in these comorbidities between obesity and non-obese individuals. Now, the final slide providing statistics involves actual prescription drug use. Opioid prescriptions were present in 69% of obesity claims, as compared to 18% for non obesity claims. And psychotropic drugs, which are the medications that affect behavior, mood, thoughts, or perception, were used in a staggering 25.7% of the obesity claims, as compared to just 2.7% for non obesity claims. Again, just the numbers are so staggering. And finally, this will even surprise you even more, I think, the cost implications. Case mixed adjusted data showed that for total benefits for obesity claims, as I said before, averaged $116,437, which is 81% higher than non-obesity claims of $64,000. Medical benefits actually were nearly double at $68,000 versus $35,000, and indemnity or payout benefits were 64% higher at a 47, almost $48,000 versus $29,000. Now, the average number of paid temporary disability days was a staggering 80.1% higher for obesity claims of 242.6 days versus a non-obesity claim of 134.7 days. Big, big difference. So what are the takeaways of this report? Well, we did learn that more than a quarter of the injured workers in California do identify themselves as obese versus 1 in 3 for the rest of the country. Also, we learned that the reclassification of obesity as a treatable disease rather than just a complicating factor, and the resulting pressure on the providers to address the conditions and on the insurers to pay for treatments increases the likelihood that obesity will become more prevalent in California workers' compensation system. Not only as a comorbidity, but think about this, as a potential compensable consequence of an injury. For example, when an injured worker gains weight due to inactivity or as a side effect of their prescribed medications, in certain situations, it may even be claimed as a primary diagnosis. You probably have already seen some of this in your QMEs to date. Now, the reclassification of obesity as a disease continues to increase its prevalence in workers' compensation claims, and it does actually significantly impact the costs, as we saw. However, they're still discussing this because they say that further research is needed to understand the long-term effects and the interaction between the different healthcare systems. So this is actually a work in progress. So in conclusion, it's very clear that the implementation of operational and financial changes stemming from the changes in the classification of obesity as a medical disease has really created new challenges and incentives for control and treatment. Now, in time of ongoing reform within the California workers' compensation system, the impact of these changes in the classification of obesity will be and is an area of continued study and analysis. And frankly, an updated study on obesity and its effects on the workers' compensation is being performed right now. And we'll provide you with the new study findings when they do become available. So, doctors, I'm Dr. Chris Rapoff, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join me in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I encourage you to join us next time as we explore interesting topics as they are related to the California workers' compensation system. Until then, thank you.